Okay, we're back with our monthly video sort of thing. What is it? It's a monthly review of
second monthly, isn't it?
Yeah. And we're sticking with the Palgrave Handbook of Male Psychology and Mental Health. I'm Zach Fine.
I'm Sue Parker Hall.
And we're both therapists, and we're interested in ways of working with men that...
Well, that's a respectful of masculinity, that we don't want to change men, do we? No.
Yeah.
And so changing people, therapists' attitudes towards working with men.
Yeah, and exploring maybe some of the blocks with helping therapeutic change in men, and maybe also ways of identifying how men are being put off therapy, where sometimes they are, because therapy's become quite feminised. So we're just looking at bits of content each month that hone in on this issue, and the Palgrave Handbook of Male Psychology and Mental Health was published last year, and it's just full of amazing stuff from researchers and practitioners. So the one that I've chosen, you chose the last one, didn't you, which was the Evolutionary Perspectives by Martin Seeger. I've gone for the very first chapter of the book, which is, it's pretty scientific, and it's all about testosterone. Let me scroll back. Where are my notes? Sorry, I should have done this earlier. There we go. It's called From Fetuses to Boys to Men, The Impact of Testosterone on Male Lifespan Development by John Barry and Rebecca Owens. This is quite a dense read. There's loads of references to research, and there's quite a bit of scientific jargon, but not. I didn't think it was over the top. He definitely wants the reader to be able to move through it without getting bogged down. But nevertheless, I had to reread a few bits. But I actually came away thinking, wow, this is actually quite liberating, because he's just talking about testosterone without any apologies or caveats, or, well, there's some caveats, but not trying to sort of be ideological about it at all, which just seemed really refreshing.
It's been associated, doesn't it, so much with aggression, with lust, with violence. Machismo.
And I think maybe probably the key point that I came away with was that the evidence suggests quite convincingly, he looks at a lot of evidence, that they both do, that there's a cultural perception of testosterone that's negative, which can produce negative outcomes. However, in controlled scientific studies, testosterone has been shown to actually to facilitate pro-social behaviours. So it's associated with pro-social changes in behaviour. And doesn't appear to be any evidence in this article, at least, that it's the other way around. So testosterone just means aggression and antisocial behaviour. And he goes through it, they both go through it quite systematically. So we could go through, do you want me to sort of go through the main points?
Right.
So there's a lot of evidence from studies on animals that testosterone goes with more aggression. And I think one of the key distinctions these two are making, John Barry and Rebecca Owens, are that Homo sapiens are a lot more complicated. So in some situations, but basically there's a how do they put it? A dominance. We seek to, males of the Homo sapiens species seek to assert dominance in a range of fields in order to pass their genes on, basically. And
can I just interject?
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the research has shown that women are more attracted to dominant males, actually. And this idea of the tall, dark, handsome male doesn't come from just nowhere.
No, there's loads of evolutionary psychology on that.
There's even been some kind of measuring done whereby women like men to be 21 centimetres taller and men like women to be 8 centimetres shorter. So there's going to be some discrepancies there. Obviously not everyone's going to be satisfied, but I thought it was really interesting piece of research that generally women like taller men.
And there's the ideal female body ratios that evolutionary psychologists like Gad Saad have identified. I don't know if he came up with it originally, but he talks about it in a really kind of interesting, amusing way. And there's no accident that a young man driving a red Ferrari might seem attractive to. There's all this stuff comes out in consumerism and different ways that we might not be conscious of, but it all comes down to these drivers. But I think I'm sort of drifting a bit off the point. I want to go back to the main point of this article. I think what I got from it was that the dominance seeking among men in our species it seems to correlate with mating. So there's a spike in testosterone in adolescence, and then there's a spike in, I hope I'm getting this right, I think I am. There's a spike in dominance seeking. Okay, so there's spikes in sort of cultural output by men in certain age ranges. One of them's adolescence. The other one's like between 25 and 30. And this is all averages. And then from about 40 onwards, it sort of tapers down, and all of that correlates with testosterone levels in the bloodstream. So you get a spike in adolescence, and then when you're in your 20s, it's up, and then it kind of goes down from 40. And the people that have studied this, including these two, are suggesting that the motivation for this dominance-seeking behaviour is to acquire a mate and procreate. And as soon as you do that, your testosterone levels drop, and you just don't really care so much about being seen to be dominant in your group. And the really interesting thing is you can be a non-father, so you can be a bloke without a kid in a committed relationship. If you're in a committed relationship, your testosterone levels will be lower than if you were just single. But if you're in a committed relationship, but actually you're having affairs, you're interested in other women, your testosterone levels will be a bit higher. And if you're in a committed relationship when you have a child, your testosterone levels drop right down through the process of fatherhood. And the more contact, the more nurturing you do with your child, the less testosterone you have in your bloodstream. So what they're doing is they're just trying to link the basic biological facts, although it's actually very complicated because of all sorts of reasons. Like testosterone can be converted into estrogen and this and that, so you don't get too bogged down.
And 40-year-old men who haven't got children are still going to have quite testosterone levels.
So if you've never met, if you're single and you're in your 40s, you can be pumped full of testosterone.
Or recently separated or divorced.
Although I was thinking, I don't feel like I've got a lot of testosterone in my system at the moment. So I was just wondering, I was trying to think like, oh, I wonder what's going on with me. But I remember feeling like I had a lot in my, whenever it was in my 20s. So I'm just, I suppose it brought a lot of stuff up for me personally. Yeah. Anyway, so a couple of. So there's a lot of technical information in here, isn't there?
So that was testosterone across the lifespan, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's what you were kind of talking about.
Just wondering how much to go into, because I don't want to get super technical. Yeah. But they start just by trying to clarify the different pathway, so there's testosterone can affect us, our bodies organisationally, which basically means that if we're exposed to it in the womb prenatally when we're fetuses, as boys are, then it starts to sort of make structural changes to the body. So that then affects how testosterone is processed in future. So that's called organisational. And then there's
the activational one was the other one that called.
Yeah, the other one's activational. That's right. And there's an assumption that the impact of testosterone is always activational. So you can just kind of inject yourself with testosterone, and then you'll play out what masculinity is. So in the very first paragraph of this piece, they're raising questions about those assumptions and saying actually there's different pathways and we need to clarify them. And there's direct effects where testosterone acts directly on the body in the bloodstream, and then there's indirect effects, which is more to do with the kind of long-term permanent changes.
Structuring of the organism. Whereas the activational is much more short-lived, isn't it? It comes and goes and related to specific situations.
Yeah. And there can be an interesting interplay. So if you're in a sort of, I think this is right, if you're in a confrontation, you can get a spike of testosterone. So basically, when you, as an organism, when you feel threatened, you release these androgens. Testosterone is basically one word, but there's a lot of these chemicals under one roof. They're androgens.
Androgens.
Yeah. And they get released, and they make you more able to kind of hold your own boundaries, but they also affect the likelihood of more conflict as well. So there's a kind of duality.
If necessary.
Yeah.
Necessary. I liked what Barry and Owens were talking about, the kind of cultural sensitivity of testosterone. That there's a lot of research shows that culture does have an influence. It's not purely biological. It can be tailored.
Yeah, and it comes out in very creative ways, doesn't it? And actually, pretty much the last resort is physical aggression. That's usually coming when all the other avenues of, they go through all these different sort of expressions of assertiveness and dominance seeking, and it includes giving to charity, altruism, chivalry. And there was even this piece of research done where they gave some of the, I think it was an all-female sample actually, but they gave some of the females a testosterone supplement, and some got a placebo. And then they asked them questions about, they were sort of encouraged to lie for a monetary reward.
Yes.
And the ones that had testosterone were less likely to lie, because the theory went that they were sort of stepping into an idea of chivalry, which was, well, that was my word, but
status.
You're willing to you're willing to kind of lose something in order to show yourself as, in a cultural context, dominant. You know, sort of. I can't quite explain it.
Is it trustworthy or?
Honest, truth.
Honest,
honest. So I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to lie, even though I'm missing out on this reward, because long term, you know, I want my potential allies or my potential mates to regard me as truthful, and so the idea of going for a dishonest, kind of tricky, immediate gain doesn't actually work in that strategy. They bring up the Taoist yin and yang idea and Carl Jung's anima and animus. So the idea that men have a kind of inner feminine soul that they, you know, if they're alienated from, they struggle to kind of relate to feminine energies in the world, but if they develop a relationship with their inner anima, they can become a lot more successful in their lives. Successful isn't the word, but more integrated. And similarly, women have an inner animus, which is the masculine energy. And the when the masculine and feminine hormones are out of whack, so men have testosterone, women have estrogen, and you're supposed to have about, a good balance is 10 to 1, isn't it? So I've got 10 times as much testosterone as estrogen, and you've got vice versa.
Yeah.
But when it becomes out of whack, women experience fertility issues, weight gain, type 2 diabetes, depression. Men experience sexual problems, loss of libido, osteoporosis, loss of muscle mass, anemia, fatigue, diabetes, heart problems, mood swings, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
They look at some of the structural differences in the brain. I mean, they're quite equivocal about whether about the nature-nurture argument, aren't they? They're not very dogmatic. They're just going through trying to give you the lay of the land. Really, that's what I feel they're doing in this article, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I get a sense that they are saying nature and nurture are both significant and important, and that culture channels testosterone behaviour differently in different cultures, but for the same reasons that you're talking about, for men to get mates, keep mates, protect their family, provide for the family.
And that's the challenge theory of adaptation. Is that right? Is it called the challenge theory?
Challenge theory, yes.
I found that really interesting. So there seems to be a lot of evidence to suggest that that's got legs. So it's basically the idea that it's not just with Homo sapiens, but it's across other species as well. And it's not particularly male. It's not particularly about the male or the female, because in different species, the different sexes are involved in different divisions of labour with reproduction. But the idea basically is that the sex that isn't directly involved in nurturing the offspring the most has the capacity to take on these extra activities mediated through testosterone in our case, but also in other species, so that you can then go off and do these active dominance-seeking behaviours. I think that's right. Yeah.
Dominance-seeking. I mean, I think of it, that is what the phrase that's used in the chapter, but I think it's more for me about maintaining status, socially acceptable status.
And it becomes less and less important for you to do that once you've got your wife and you've got your 2 kids or whatever it is. You just don't care about status at that point because you've got less testosterone. Because you've kind of done your thing.
Evolutionary wise, it's complete, isn't it? Yeah.
I found. Shall I just read the bit about the challenge hypothesis?
Yeah, do.
Because I don't know whether I kind of got that, murdered it a bit. So the challenge hypothesis is saying that testosterone varies in the sex least obligated to offspring development across different species. So in Syrian hamsters, testosterone increases aggression for resources, status and mates because there's no other way to achieve dominance. But in humans, it's more complicated and we can achieve dominance in different ways through cultural displays. But people with high testosterone experience more restless energy, higher arousal, more urge to socialise, more proactive in problem solving, wanting to get things done straight away. I'm thinking of my dad here. They have a distinct intensity in their approach to any activity. It doesn't really matter what the context is, but they're just like...
any activity.
I mean, they all sound a bit stereotypical, but it is what it is, isn't it, I suppose? I thought there was another... Just at the end of that, there was an interesting thought where they referred to research by Dabbs et al., which said that individuals with high testosterone, this quote, felt their energy was constrained by external environments which caused frustration. Close quote.
As I was reading that, I was thinking of boys in school.
Yeah.
Because I just...
You get told off for not sitting still.
And the high levels of arousal and the urge to socialise.
Yeah.
All the kind of things that are going to get you into trouble in the school system, aren't they?
And then they're blacklisted. It's not the right word, but they're given detention, and then they keep getting detention.
Problematised, aren't they? Yeah.
As masculinity generally all too often is, isn't it? Okay. So there were the bit on the brain. I think they just listed a few physiological differences. So males tend to have a larger amygdala, which is the seat of fear and emotions, isn't it?
Kind of alarm centre, isn't it? And
there's a difference in the response to sexual stimuli in the brain. Women show more
pleasure and fear apparently in the amygdala. Men show more
range
of pleasure and fear in the amygdala.
It's interesting because this has just occurred to me now that one of the archetypal masculine qualities is courage. But if at the same time you've got a bigger amygdala, you've got higher capacity to experience fear, which kind of means that is even more extraordinary, really, because you're even more scared. I think there's this came up a lot in the book The Boy Crisis by Warren Farrell. He's saying that men and boys, there's this sort of myth that they don't actually feel the pain as much as women, and they don't feel emotional pain as much as women. But of course it's not true. Everyone feels, everyone's alive and they feel things the same sort of way. And my mind always comes back to all the people, not just men, but a lot of men who've died in wars for their communities. We don't. I know we do remember them each year, but I often just start to think. I saw 1917, the film, the other day.
Right.
It's so moving.
Is it?
But,
what touched you? What touched you about it?
I suppose it's the sort of timeless idea of the duty and the sacrifice and the courage. Even if, for whatever reason, those men are doing it, the fidelity that took. So, I guess I'm sort of going off point a bit, but the larger amygdala
I
means...
guess quite a bit of testosterone was involved in 1917.
Yeah. It's very non-Hollywood, though. It really felt so human. Like, I just felt like how it
testosterone is human, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
The rising to the need of the situation.
Yeah.
Courage, testosterone. The protector and provider, fighter, winner.
Yeah.
It's kind of all wrapped up in war, isn't it?
The story, I won't ruin the story, but it sort of pretty much follows two friends, soldiers, on a mission, and they both step into the protector role with each other when the other one is more vulnerable than us.
I love the Bands of Brothers stories.
Oh yeah.
I just love the relationship between those brothers.
Yeah.
And I also think Saving Private Ryan, although it's an incredibly violent movie, I love it because of the relationship between the men.
Yeah. There's been some really good, interesting work on that theme by Sebastian Junger, who is he used to be a war correspondent, and he made a documentary called, I can't remember. He was in a hill station in Afghanistan with a detachment of American soldiers. Restrepo, that's it. That's the name of the film. And he's done a lot of work and research on what it's like for soldiers coming back, and they all say the same thing. It was hell, but I want to go back, because what they felt was that they were with other men who would die for them, and they would die for the other men, and they got back to civilian society, and they didn't actually know what their relationship was with anyone, because you don't really know how much the next person's willing to do for you. It's incredibly vague when you actually think about it, and when you've had that uncertainty for months on end in combat, everything else just feels there's nothing real.
Hyper vigilance that's required, and it's a bit like going to the moon and coming back and adapting again, kind of thing.
And I don't know what I was reading the other day, but it might have been James Hillman, but he was talking about, when soldiers get back from combat, happened with the Second World War, usually they didn't talk about it at all, and often that was because of post-traumatic stress, but equally sometimes it was about not being able to really explain that they had enjoyed some aspects of combat as well.
That's interesting.
They actually enjoyed the highs, because it's very well documented that there's an extraordinarily positive aspect or exciting aspect of combat as well. You feel alive, more alive than you've ever felt, and you're with your platoon or your soldiers, and there's this sense of connectedness, and the primal violence against your enemy as well. I think some people enjoy that. Okay, drifting around off topic a bit there.
I liked the experiment around problem solving.
3D cubes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain that? That was really interesting research, wasn't it?
I think it was women, wasn't it? A lot of this research has been done on women, noticing the impact of testosterone, because they haven't got much. The effects are greater, aren't they, really? Yeah. So, just trying to remember what it was.
So they had a stack of cubes. They were shown a drawing of a stack of cubes.
Yeah, it was an image, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And they wanted the participants to imagine what that stack of cubes looked like from a different angle, didn't they? And those who had been administered testosterone were much more successful in doing that, weren't they? Than those who had the placebo.
And that wasn't just one piece of research, actually. It was.
Was it more than that?
Yeah.
Yeah, 3D, wasn't it? Yeah, men with prostate cancer who were on the androgen deprivation therapy didn't do so well to that task, did
so
they?
it's sort of there's evidence both sides. If you give a dose of testosterone to a woman, she does better.
Yeah.
If you take it away from a man, he does worse.
Yeah.
I was really intrigued by some of the language here, but I tried to find it on the internet and I couldn't find any explanation.
Yeah.
So it's the bit underneath that in the article where they're talking about brain scans.
Yes.
During these activities of mentally rotating an image, 3D image.
Yes.
And it says we've seen through brain fMRI scans that there's different patterns of neural activation happening.
Yes.
With different testosterone levels.
Yeah.
And there may be different solving strategies, so completely different strategies to solving the puzzle, which is interesting, I thought. Women using a serial categorical processing approach. Don't know what that means.
No, I tried to Google. In fact, I don't think I nearly set Google on fire. Googling all the terms from this chapter.
Yes.
But I tried to look up serial categorical processing approach and couldn't find anything.
It's not on the interwebs. And then men using a coordinate processing approach. Yeah. I'd like to know what those two things mean.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And there was even evidence that a female twin who had a male twin was better at this task of mental rotation than a female who was a twin with another female. And the first twin was better, the conjecture is, because her male twin had the prenatal surge of testosterone in the womb, and she had got some of that as the twin. So she had the deep kind of organisational imprint of testosterone.
It's interesting. Yes. I couldn't quite get my head around that, because I was imagining if it's a male and female twin, they're in different sacs. But I don't know.
Yeah, I must admit I don't really know. I don't know much about biology.
No.
But I'm interested in it.
Yeah.
There's a good quote here about perceptions of testosterone and aggression, which I think are quite pertinent to what we're doing as therapists, because we're trying to raise awareness, I guess, of the values around masculinity as a culture and as a sort of profession, therapy.
Yeah, and not buying into any kind of stereotypes.
Yeah.
Whether it's about men or whether it's about testosterone.
Yeah. So here's a quote. When considering activational effects of testosterone circulating in the bloodstream, there is a popular misconception surrounding its function that testosterone causes aggression in humans. This misconception has contributed to the popular perception that men are more aggressive than women because testosterone is the male hormone. This conclusion is based on a fallacy derived from oversimplified and incomplete information. So testosterone may lead to aggression in humans, they're saying, but the evidence is not consistent. Humans are not bound to a narrow range of behaviours in order to dominate, like the hamster that we mentioned is, as this is the case in some less complex species. Humans may demonstrate dominance in a number of given specialities, ranging from academic achievements, creativity, physical domains, and even in cooperation and altruism. I think that's a really important distinction. I'd probably start with that if I was trying to kind of really pare it all back. Because until I read this, I think I sort of thought that, to be honest.
Did you?
Yeah, I didn't really know, but I just had this idea that if you've got loads of testosterone, you kind of turn into a bit of a
antisocial,
just aggressive, kind of really. But yeah, I obviously had some prejudice there as well.
I think I didn't want to think that. I didn't want to think that. What this article's done is given me some facts about that.
Underneath that, Barry and Owens go on to explain where that comes from. So it's not kind of coming from a vacuum. It's coming from science on, they've studied animals, and that is kind of generally true in animals. So if you increase the testosterone levels in a rat's bloodstream, it becomes more aggressive. But the really key difference is with humans, quote, there are mitigating factors such as cultural context and social variables when we attempt to generalise such findings to humans.
There's some kind of circularity as well, that where aggressive situations increase testosterone, and testosterone increases the capacity to be aggressive.
Yes.
It's like
so it can facilitate more of those situations.
Yeah. But on the whole, it's all mediated by the social and cultural environment, except for obviously some of the people I work with, male and female actually, with rage issues, are not so regulated by the social environment. But
can you say a bit more about how that feeds into this, or how that?
The obvious thing is that you don't have to be a male and you don't have to have testosterone.
Rage is rage.
Have rage, yeah. It's a human trauma behaviour. I understand it's a trauma behaviour, as anybody who's unable to process their life experience, to feel it through, to engage with the discrete emotions that help us orient ourselves in the world, see what needs to happen, grieve things. If we can't do that, we're at the mercy of anxiety, hypervigilance, rage, including violence, or what I would call cold rage, and that's the more dissociated, depressed, numb, not very present zone of existence. So I think I only mention it because I just think I've worked with some very enraged women. You know, I see it as a human problem, not a gender problem. That is one of my main reasons for getting interested in masculinity, because of the radical feminist idea of what it is to be a man is just so alien from my experience of being with men, working with men, you know, the men in my life. It's kind of just was too much dissonance. So I feel quite relieved having read this chapter, as I do so much of the work in that book feels really levelling. I think you used the word before we started to record about polarisation.
Yeah.
It's not polarised.
No.
I just find polarisation so deeply disturbing.
Yeah. Well, I get it. I mean, it's sort of bringing up things around rage, actually, because if it's that sort of behaviour is not wanting to be able to start labelling the discrete things that are happening and orient ourselves as a culture or as a profession or as a, you know, human beings or individuals. It's not, and that's kind of what rage is. I mean, like what you do in your book, you kind of, you make it very discreet that anger it's actually got a kind of creative driving force that can be healthy, but rage is sort of like trapped, overwhelmed, unprocessed, everything, and
including some anger. But
yeah, and I feel like there's a lot of that going on, maybe in the radical feminist movement, but also on the other side, you know, there's equally as sort of unintegrated, unhealthy. I mean, it's not, that polarisation doesn't really create space for new cooperation. It just sort of deepens a divide.
Yes.
And so that there's parallel process on different scales, you know, micro and macro happening. I think.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I've read it. I don't know if I used that, but I couldn't find a whole heap of things that would inform my practice. It kind of has made my attitude more positive to testosterone, and what about you? Did you take things that might be helpful for your practice?
No, not directly, but I think just as part of my ongoing navigation through this area, this feels like very important theory. I mean, I can see why they've made it the first chapter in the book, and the book starts with a section on theory, because this, I mean, we really need to be able to, we need to know this stuff if we're really talking about masculinity and what the differences are between, you know, men and women, and if there's men have different needs to women, then why don't we know this stuff? And also why aren't we allowed to talk about it?
You're right. I was just thinking. This is non-ideological.
Yeah.
It's non-ideological. No.
Explicitly, and it ends with a really nice sort of paragraph in the conclusion, just saying, you know, we want to encourage, you know, space for a dispassionate look at the evidence. I mean, he critiques one writer. I can't remember who she is now. Let's find it.
Janet Hyde.
Oh yeah, that rings a bell. Oh yeah, the work of Janet Hyde, 2005, has been very influential in the social sciences, and her gender similarities hypothesis, with the notion that there are more similarities between men and women than differences, has become axiomatic. However, her hypothesis is based on the flawed notion that because there are more similarities, any differences are unimportant. But she ignored decades of consistent evidence on play and toy preferences showing a large sex difference between boys and girls. So what he's saying is, well, they're both saying is, you know, gender and sex differences have, there's complexities in the causality, and nurture is inevitably entwined in it because there's parenting and culture and this and that, but that doesn't mean we need to oversimplify our approach or overcomplicate it. If we use good methodology and we have a dispassionate interpretation of that and an openness to debate, then there's no problem. You can just explore it, which I think is great. It's kind of liberating. It doesn't. I didn't come across any dogma or, you know, I honestly, I don't know whether Barry and Owens are feminist or anti-feminist, and I think that's great because I'm kind of tired of all that stuff in a way. I just like, what's the point of it? It doesn't go anywhere.
I had a thought and it just slipped away. What was I going to say? You were talking about Janet Hyde, weren't you? And you were talking about. No, it's gone.
There's just a little bit in this article about the positive impact of testosterone on men, which I thought was probably worth mentioning, because a lot of this stuff is couched in negative terms, and I've often wondered where's the good stuff. Yeah, okay, there's some problems, but and that's what they're doing. There's they're pointing to research saying that circulating testosterone in your bloodstream can motivate men to do their best in situations. It can promote flexible behaviours according to cultural and contextual parameters. Men have innate motivation to dominate in particular contexts. This can be pro-social rather than aggressive in humans. Testosterone can have positive aspects such as elevated generosity, cooperation and altruism. And there was a really interesting study where they
actually more generous than women, the research found, didn't it?
Yeah, so I'll just read the quote. So, evidence of placebo effects of testosterone indicate that rather than testosterone and masculinity being inherently bad, meaning aggressive and negative, societal perceptions of testosterone and its function are fundamentally negative. So it's a perception issue. These perceptions have become ingrained in society, contributing to the conflation of testosterone and aggression. Because the women in the study were given, I think I mentioned this before, didn't they? Some were given a real supplement and others were given a placebo. And the ones that had a placebo started acting in kind of more negative ways because they had this sort of belief that that's what was supposed to happen.
When you had testosterone.
Yeah, but the ones who really had testosterone started acting more generously. Okay.
Good stuff.
Have we done it? I think we've. I didn't go through all of my notes, but I think we've probably.
I think that's a very nice, positive place to finish, actually.
Yeah.
What she's like.
It would be good to distill some of this down into some key points, I think, because there's a lot in that, loads of ground covered, but a really important start in the theory, I think.
Great, good stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll be back in a month with another one.
Yeah.
You choosing that?
I'm going to choose that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know what it is?
No.
Okay.